Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody again. Thanks for taking another look at one of my videos. This time around, it's a Corgi Taxi! Well, there's not a great deal of history to talk about with these. There's thousands and thousands of them made in mass-produced numbers from Corgi. The doors flew open all the time. I always used to ram them full of blue tack to keep the doors shut. There's not really that much more to say about it, really. So, other than doing my usual job of stripping it all down, this is what we are left with. I've jumped this step quite fast this time because I've done that many videos with paint removal, and I've even done a tutorial on that. So if you want to take a look, please do. It's on my channel if you just have a quick search for it. But what we're left with is a quite uninspiring London taxi. Not very good cars to look at, as you will probably all agree with. It's one of the staple parts of London itself, along with the iconic buses. This time around, I just wanted to do something different. So other than doing the usual of removing the bodies and showing you really what's inside, nothing too inspiring. I wanted just to get straight down with it because there's lots to do on it this time, and do my attempt at a drag version. Now, the car I'm going to use as a donor is a Hot Wheels. I think it was called, it's got a little baby in it. I forget what it's called now, Little Dandy or something like that. If anybody can remember, just please comment on it. But underneath, once you rip that off, it's got quite a good little base. And originally, I didn't know whether I was going to straightforward up and use this base or carry on with the original Corgi one. But now I've taken them both apart, I think it's best I carry on with the original Corgi one because it's still got that radiator on the front, the grille, which I want to incorporate into it. It's going to be too much messing around with this Hot Wheels base, so I'm going to probably use that again at a later date for another little project and keep it as it is, because I'm only going to have to chew this one up anyway. So I'm going to get straight on with removing the wheels from both of these cars, and I have to say this time around they were both an absolute pain. I don't know if because the original Corgi one was an old metal chassis, sometimes a little bit difficult to get off. This new version of the Hot Wheels, they were made with the strongest steel I've ever seen on a set of axles, and it took a hell of a snipping around and cutting to get them off. So I haven't bored you too much with that. But what I'm going to do this time around is utilise the original Corgi chassis. I'm just going to polish it up a little bit by getting some of the marks off the original base. And what I want to do is just modify the back wheel recesses, I suppose, on them. It's come up quite nice, actually. There's a little bit of heat discoloration on little parts of it, but other than that, it does look pretty smart. Nice and strong. I like these metal bases. I hate the plastic ones because they just chew up too easily when you're trying to remove the bodies off them. But the rear wheels I'm going to carry across again and put a little bit of a twist on them, but I just need to take a little bit away just to give access because they're a bigger diameter wheel, and just by simply keeping it nice and sturdy in a vise, or you could use a clamp, but then using a rotary tool, just nip away and just give it a little bit more clearance. It's always good to use eye protection as well at this stage, and I always take my time because you've only really got one hit at this. A little bit of a slip and you've butchered something that is going to be fit for the bin. So just take your time when you're using these power tools. Let the tool do the work as well. I have to keep telling that to my sons every time they pick something up. They're there with a drill and are pushing down on it, putting stress on the drill bits and all the rest of it. Just let the tool do the work, and might take a little bit longer. Well, it will take a bit longer, but comes off nice and easy. Otherwise, a little bit of a linish up, a little bit of a file down of the rough areas, and we'll have the clearance ready. So I'm going to use some bent open paper clips for the axles, which I will use on other parts of the car later on in the video, so I'll just show you quickly how I bend them and straighten them up. But for now, what I'm going to use to cover up the rather uninspiring gold spokes of these cheap and cheerful Hot Wheels wheels is a drawing pin. We call them drawing pins here in the UK. I think they call them pin tacks around the world in other places, but if you just trim off the pin bit, and for now just put a little bit of blue tack just to show you what they're roughly going to look like. A bit like the moon eyes type wheels that I've seen on some cars. And I've used this method before, but I'm just going to quickly show you again. I'm just going to solder the axle pins, rivets, nuts on the end. Hasn't got to be too pretty, because I always file them down, sand them into shape, give it a little bit of depth to it afterwards. So you just blob it on the end to start with. We'll clean it up in a minute, but put the next wheel on in roughly where you want it to do. And it's always best to give it a little bit more than trimming it too tight, so it's easier to grind it down, cut it down afterwards than not having enough in the first place. So just mark out roughly where you want it to go and trim it off like so. And then you wouldn't believe how many times at this stage I've gone ahead and soldered the other end and forgot to put the wheel on altogether, or I put the wheel on the wrong way. So as daft as it sounds, make sure to put the wheels on the right way round. And again, just solder on another little bit on the opposite side. It doesn't matter too much if you make a bit of a hash of it. As long as you've given it plenty to trim back afterwards, you can always again do what I'm doing here and just heat it up and let it run back down a little bit. But grip it afterwards and then simply file it down into the shape on the end to hold the wheels on. I'll just quickly show you the other side which I've finished, rather than you all sit here and watch me filing it all down all together. But there you go, just shape it to look like a little pin at the top, and then you'll have a precisely matched set of axles on your car. I'll just repeat the process again for the front ones, but here I'll just show you just nipping off the pin from the drawing pin, and then a little blob of blue tack, and there we go, and then it will fit quite nicely. This is just a dry fit if you like. I'll glue them on later on, but just to show you roughly what a perfect fit circumference wise to the original wheels. Looks pretty sweet. There you go. And then, yeah, as I say, I'll do the front ones. And I've used, again, it was a good little donor car to use. It had a good fat set of rims on the back and some narrow ones on the front, just like a drag car. So, pretty pleased with that. And normally, when you use the interiors of the original cars, they tend to push down on the axles and keep it all in situ. So once you bolt it all back up together and screw it all in, it does go together quite easily. But this time I'm not using the interior that it came with. I'll make my own in a short while. So whilst the axles do grip relatively well, on the little recess pins on the chassis, I suppose the best way to describe it. I'm just going to blob a bit of glue just to hold them in place, and I use this Araldite stuff. It's quite sticky, yet it molds quite well. Conversely, it sort of melts into position by just watching it and moving it around slightly, or slowly fill in all the nooks and crannies, and it's a good little glue. So I'm just going to hold the axle still and the wheels can still spin round. So whilst that's drying, I'll crack on and remove this bonnet off the front. And I was a little bit undecided to start with whether to just cut out a hole and have the donor engine protruding out of it, or I was going to remove the bonnet in its entirety. So I'm just going to go full ahead and remove the bonnet, I think, for this one. That's a great little acquisition. This little scroll saw, 25 quid off eBay second hand. It's got little floating heads top and bottom, so you can really give it a little bit of jep and move it around, and the blade very rarely snaps. It still makes me jump a mile when it does snap. So great little piece of kit. Look how smooth it cuts. It really does cut butter smooth, leaves no burrs whatsoever. And again, this is on the metal parts. When it's on the plastic and the wood, it's really, really good. So I mean, it's even cut through the rivet post that sharp. It's like a little blade. It's really precise. I highly recommend them. If you can find one cheap second hand off eBay, even better. But I'll probably keep this bonnet anyway and use it on a little wrap project for something else. But for now, it's going to sit this engine somewhat like that. I'm going to have to fiddle around a little bit with it, but it's going to look pretty good, especially with the radiator from the original car sat up front. I've sort of skimmed over this a little bit, but I've trimmed back the exhaust tips just where they roll out a bit because they were fouling on the inner arches. But I'm just going to put a few holes back in there just to give it a little bit of realism. That wasn't on the originals anyway. And underneath, I've just had a Styrene. I've mounted a little mount for the engine, effectively. There'll be a hole originally left under the chassis from what was the body post, but now we've trimmed that away. That was underneath the bonnet. It'll sit quite nicely in line, and I can screw that in situ, and it looks a little bit more pleasing to the eye than trying to glue it in or fix it in another manner. So I try to make all the cars that I make screw together quite nicely, rather than, you know, I'm going to say glue them, but I've glued the axles now. I've said that, and I'm showing you as I'm doing it. But technically, I try to make them an assembled car again when it's finished, just for a little bit of realism, I suppose. But now I'm going to make a bulkhead, so there's no big gaping hole from the engine bay into the interior. Straightforward with a piece of styrene. I literally just cut it to the width, and then just roughly gauged what the radiuses look like by eye. Trimmed them back again ever so roughly at this stage, just to get a rough profile. And then once I offered it back up again, a little bit of sanding down just to make them a bit more of a smoother fit, and the job went together quite nicely. So not bad for a first attempt. Normally you can be going back into for a fair few minutes trying to get it right, so I literally did it as quick as I'm showing you now on the video. And to put it into place, I've just used some little L sections again of styrene, and I'm literally going to glue them to the interior of the body. This little matchstick's getting bigger and bigger and bigger with the bits of dried glue on it. But once I've put them in place, I'll do one both sides naturally. It's just a matter of doing the same. You can either glue this bulkhead or use some of the mech liquid solution to melt the styrene pieces together, whichever one you prefer. But all in all, you could put some more details on there if you wanted to. I've omitted them this time, but you could put some little brake servos or radiator water level fill bottles, something like that. But finished wise, it sits together quite nicely, and it'll butt up a little bit better when you come to screw it all down as well. So onto the interior. I'm using some products this time from Krome Bandits. I don't know if anybody's seen these. They're really good little photo etched real metal parts. Really accurate. On this particular one you get some strut braces, cross members, but they do a range of different products. Again, equally high precision. They do a little tool set like this. Replica brake discs and calipers, and the steering wheel was on that one, and a spoiler kit. Really good. I'll put some links in the description to them, but I'm really impressed with them. So I'm going to use the seat in this because it's a nice little fitting piece to a drag car, the metal bucket seat. And if you've never used photo etch parts before, try not to bend them. If they won't easily pull away or twist off, go back and cut them, because once you bend them, you know, you're damaging them at the end of the day. So just take your time and trim all the little burrs off afterwards, the little sprue parts, I suppose. And I've got a nice little bending pliers set here. You could use normal pliers. These ones are quite long nosed and the same width, flat all the way along, so they are quite handy. But you could just use some smaller modelling pliers to do the job. And I think it sits quite neat and quite fitting for this project. Actually, it looks pretty good. I am just going to make some little seat runners underneath there, again out of styrene, just to lift it up a little bit, because having my little OCD hat on, if it was a real little car, you'd sit down there and you wouldn't even see past the bulkhead, the interior, let alone the engine. So there I have, I've just little bits underneath as I'm working around making some interior parts now to lift it up. And I've done videos before on making interiors, again on my channel if you want to take a look. So I'll go very quickly along with this for this particular build, because it's quite minimalist compared to other ones. So very basic flat sheets, cut to size, shaped and sanded to size, and with a little bit of care you could probably spend an hour or so and just replicate its own custom little interior for it. So I'm not going to go too overboard with this one. Again, it was another car that really I wasn't intending to do. I've got a big list of other cars, and this one just sort of leapt out as I was searching for the particular car I was doing, and I thought, well, I don't know, I saw this other little Hot Wheels drag car and I thought, no, let's make a drag car. So all I've done now is put some little cockpit tiles in, use some styrene rod and simply just cut little slithers of them to replicate different size gauges. And the final little pièce de résistance for the interior is just to put the steering wheel in, and I'm just using my little pin drill, jeweler's drill, different terminologies, but the little hand drill, and slip in a little steering wheel, which again I've made out of a slither of tube this time, with a little cross section. I will trim it back and pull it a bit further inwards, because again in the real world you'd be steering that with your teeth by now, so I will just adjust this slightly. But overall it was a fairly, I think I did this one in under an hour actually, just putting this one together quickly, and that includes the bulkhead as well, so it was quite a quick job, this one. So I'm going to crack on and make the roll cage. This time I'm going to use some paper clips. I did a similar thing, well, I did do the same thing on the Land Rover Defender, which is also on my channel, and it's very simply just bending out some paper clips roughly as straight as you can, and then I just roll them round and hammer them flat on this little anvil. And once you have enough of them, you can then get cracking and build the interior. The only little difficult bit on this particular one is it's just going to foul on the driver's side, so I'm just going to drill a little hole just to put the start of the post through, start of the roll bar through, should I say. Not too uncommon. I have seen race cars with roll bars going through dash areas, so it's not completely out of left field. And then simply hold it with some pliers and just work your way around and bend it to suit. Really easy to work with paper clips. It's one of my best modelling resources. I love them. Cheap as chips. Doesn't matter if you make a hash of it. More often than not, they'll bend back out again, so you can just keep utilising them over and over again. And as long as you keep putting the body back on as you're going along, just to make sure it all sits together okay, and you're not going to foul. Like windscreens are the big problem. When you go to put the glass assembly back in, you often realise, oh crikey, it's going to touch that. So just keep offering things back up as you're going along, and as quick as you like, a little bit of solder just to put them all together. Like so. Ooh, lifted a little bit there, but and together quite neatly. Again, the soldering iron I use, it's I got it from it was Maplin's here in the UK just before they went bust. They were selling them all cheaply, and I got a decent temperature controlled one which does the job really good, so you can whack the heat up, and with minimal fuss you can make all these little things like this, and not just for electronics and everything else. So it's quite a handy little tool, this is. I'm always looking to knock together things with this soldering iron, so it's pretty cool. I enjoy it. Again, it doesn't matter too much about making too much excess solder, because you can file it down if you wanted to afterwards. But here's just a basic little roll bar. But as I'm building this, I don't quite know if I'm doing this as if it was a modern day thing, or it was a dragging a period from, well, I mean, you still have London taxis now, so I guess in my mind I was thinking, is it a 70s thing or is it a modern day thing? So I've just gone along with, off the top of my head as I've gone along. I haven't really done too much research on how I wanted this one to look, but again, using paper clips, I'm just going to knock together a roll, no, it's not a roll bar, it's a wheelie bar for the rear. And I've bent it to shape and put another little cross member already and soldered that together. I'm just going to use a method of mounting it on the back by again using a piece of styrene, cut to shape, and then with some little tube slid over the end of the wheelie bar, I will bond this together in some little C-section and make a little mount. I do like making these little mounts actually. I've used them on various cars for all matter of various different things, but to make these little mounts it's really straightforward. I've used them for mounting engines, mounting bars, and just by putting a little bit of tube and a little bit of flat section you can then have a flat surface to mount it on with all the benefits of the tube to insert something into. So a couple of them either side of this wheelie bar, again just bonded in place, and just put a little bit more on the other one, just a bit of belt and braces, make sure it's okay. And we have the start of a wheelie bar. I will shape this mount on the back so it looks a bit like an ironing board stuck out the back, so I will shape a little something into that. And then finally I would just make a little parachute pack, I suppose is the best terminology for it, to sit on the rear for a little bit more realism. Just scratching in a little pattern in the back of it just to make it look like it's been wrapped up into its little pack itself. So here I'm just doing a quick dry build before I start putting the paint and details on. As I said earlier, I tried to make mine assemble together like it was came from the factory, if you like, and although I say not glued together, I have technically glued the axles in this time, but I've already done a video on removing bodies also in my channel, which shows you how to drill the bodies away from the chassis and then tap them so you can then screw them back together like this. But essentially it's a very quick put together. The back is mounted literally by this little adapter plate which holds in the roll bar, which is screwed through the chassis, which is screwed to the body. So one screw puts all this together really, and there you have the start, albeit missing the doors, of how it's going to look. And there's a little parachute pouch on the back. The seat looks pretty sweet inside. So I'll just quickly go over the details, and I've already sprayed this black. I didn't want to bore you too much with just doing a basic paint job of black, but it was a bit of grey primer, bit of black gloss from a rattle can. It's come out really nice. The bulkhead looks good in it. I'm going to ditch this horrible yellow windscreens. As you all know, I hate coloured screens. They're absolutely rubbish. Don't know why they do them. So I'll make my own, and I was going to do them all round, but I think I have seen drag cars, funny cars, where it's just got a screen in the front and there's no more glass in the back, so I'm only going to do a windscreen for this one. And although this is a styrene sheet, well, it's from Evergreens, classed as a styrene sheet, it's just like a little piece of well, it's not perspex, but a little piece of acrylic, I guess. But I've actually used in the past other bits from food packaging. If you can get the right thickness and gauge it right, you can use some of them. I've used stuff from sandwich cellophane off the packets before as well. It's quite useful stuff to make windscreens out of. And thankfully a lot of this detailing up now is literally making it all silver and grey and aluminium. So very quickly I'll do some painting. And the only bit of detail really I want to put on this to finish is just some ignition leads, and it's simply a matter of using this little hand pin drill, again jeweler's drill. Just screw some holes in, and use some bead wire or necklace wire from the hobby shop to replicate the ignition leads. Other than a little bit of paint here and there, it's pretty much good to go, that is. And then with the final lick of interior paint, there is not much more else to do on this one. So if we just remind ourselves what it looked like, a rather uninspiring, mass-produced, awful London taxi. Iconic London taxi, whatever you want to call it. I think they look awful. But here now is my little interpretation of the drag taxi. And I've made a little billboard advertising, not billboard, but an advertising panel on the top. Taxi Driver 2 with Robert De Niro. You never know, it might happen. And ironically, I went to London last week and I didn't see one taxi with an advertising board on the top. So I was probably thinking something again from 20 years ago when I was a kid walking around London. So they're all advertised over the side now. So it was a little bit of a waste of time doing that. But here you go. It's in entirety. The little parachute on the back there. The finished engine from this Hot Wheels donor car. I will get round to doing my own engine on one of these videos shortly. The doors are now on there. Wheels look pretty good. Little drawing pin rear dished thing looks good. Some extra paint for the headlights, rear lights, number plates. That's my take on the London taxi. I hope, as always, you've enjoyed watching this video. Please like and share. Comment away. I really appreciate you all taking the time. Until the next one. You couldn't have wrote that, could you?